Captain Dana Mercer, a female pilot, gripped her phone tightly as she spoke with urgency, her voice sharp and commanding. "I'm telling you, there's a black teenager causing trouble in the pilot's lounge. Send security now." Her words echoed through the room, cold and accusatory. Standing in front of her was 16-year-old Noah Williams, his visitor badge hanging from a red lanyard around his neck. He looked up at her, voice shaking, trying to explain. "Mom, I'm just waiting for my guide. She told me I could sit here." But Captain Mercer wasn't listening. "I don't care what she told you," she snapped. "This area is for authorized personnel only." Her hand already reached for the radio as she issued an order. "Security to the pilot's lounge. I have an unauthorized individual who needs to be removed immediately." Fear flashed across Noah's face as he struggled to understand what was happening. All he had done was sit quietly, watching a documentary about aviation. Was that really a crime? Noah, a young aviation enthusiast, had long dreamed of becoming a pilot. At just 16, he was more knowledgeable about planes than most junior pilots, able to identify commercial aircraft by their engine sounds alone. Unlike other teens, who decorated their rooms with posters of pop stars or athletes, Noah's walls were covered with flight maps, cockpit diagrams, and black and white photos of aviation pioneers. Flying wasn't just a dream for him. It was a destiny that had been imprinted on his heart since he was 8 years old. The first time his mother took him to an airshow, the roar of a fighter jet cutting through the sky had captivated him. And in that moment, he had whispered to himself, "That's what I want to do." Now, that dream was finally within reach. Noah had earned a spot in the Horizon Discovery Day program, a selective event designed to give young, passionate students a behind-the-scenes look at commercial aviation. He had outshone hundreds of applicants with an essay titled, "The Sky Has Room for Everyone." His words weren't dramatic or flashy. They were thoughtful, grounded, and full of determination. That morning had felt like a dream. He had toured the control tower, met ground operations crews, and walked the jet bridge of a Boeing 787. But Noah had come prepared. He wasn't just sightseeing, he was fully engaged, asking insightful questions about thrust-to-weight ratios, weather routing systems, and contingency planning for mid-flight tech failures. It was clear to Miss Harper, the HR coordinator leading his tour, that Noah was exceptional. "Honestly," she said with a smile, "you're asking questions I don't usually hear from second-year trainees." Noah chuckled shyly and replied, "My mom always says if you want something badly enough, you better know it inside and out." Miss Harper had smiled warmly. "She sounds like a wise woman." But just as they reached the pilot's lounge, where Noah was told he could wait, things took a turn. Miss Harper received an urgent call, and she had to step away for a bit. She quickly reassured Noah that he could stay in the lounge, where a documentary was playing. He thanked her and settled into a corner, the visitor badge still hanging around his neck. The room was calm, the lights dimmed, and the sound of the television provided a soothing background. Noah was absorbed in the documentary, vintage footage of early propeller planes and stories of aviation pioneers. He didn't notice as the lounge slowly emptied, pilots filtering out to prepare for their flights. He was too focused on the documentary, too in his element. But soon, someone else walked into the lounge. She paused when she saw Noah sitting alone in the room. Captain Dana Mercer, dressed in a crisp uniform, stood tall and stared at him. She had over 10.00 flight hours under her belt. But her past had shaped how she viewed certain situations, especially when it came to unfamiliar faces in restricted spaces. Without greeting Noah or asking questions, she immediately assumed the worst. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cold. "What are you doing in here?" Startled, Noah stood up slightly. "I'm part of the Horizon Discovery Day. My guide had to step out. She said I could wait here." Captain Mercer didn't care to listen. "Who's your guide?" she asked, her voice sharp. When Noah answered, "Miss Harper from our," she didn't seem to recognize the name. "Louder," she commanded. "This lounge is for authorized personnel only." Noah held up his visitor badge, still trying to explain. But Mercer wasn't listening. She snatched the badge from him, accusing him of stealing it. "Where did you steal this from?" she demanded. The accusation hit Noah like a slap. He stammered, "No, I didn't steal it. It's mine. They gave it to me this morning." But Mercer wasn't convinced. She called for security, claiming that Noah was a security threat, that he had forged his credentials. The fear in Noah's eyes deepened as he realized he was being treated as a criminal for doing nothing more than sitting quietly, watching a documentary. But just as the situation seemed to spiral further, a voice on the radio cut through the tension: "VIP approaching the pilot's lounge." And with that, the dynamics of the situation began to change. Ava Williams, Noah's mother and the CEO of Horizon Airlines, arrived. The room fell silent as she entered, her presence commanding attention. Ava had been a flight attendant, a licensed pilot, and now she was the majority owner of the airline. She didn't need to announce herself. Her authority was clear. She approached Noah, dropped to one knee, and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce protective embrace. "I've got you now," she whispered. She then turned to Captain Mercer, who was frozen in shock. "You accused my son of being a threat," Ava said calmly. "You assumed he didn't belong. You took his badge. You called him a spy." Ava made it clear that Mercer's actions were unacceptable. "You didn't see a young man. You saw his color, not his credentials," she said, her voice calm but filled with authority. The truth had come to light, and Captain Mercer was placed on immediate suspension pending an internal review. Ava's presence had changed everything, and Noah, once again, felt seen and supported. The room, which had been filled with tension, now breathed in relief. Noah Williams, a 16-year-old teenager, had long been captivated by aviation. Unlike most of his peers who decorated their bedrooms with pop stars or sports memorabilia, Noah's walls were covered with flight maps, cockpit diagrams, and black and white photographs of aviation pioneers. From a young age, his love for flying was undeniable. At just 8 years old, his mother had taken him to an airshow, where the roar of a fighter jet slicing through the sky filled him with awe and a sense of destiny. It was at that moment he knew that aviation was his future. Over the years, Noah's passion for aviation grew, and by the age of 16, he was more knowledgeable about airplanes than many adult pilots. He could identify commercial aircraft by their engine sounds, and he spent hours reading books, studying diagrams, and working with flight simulators. When the opportunity to apply for Horizon Discovery Day, a prestigious aviation program designed to expose young students to the world of commercial aviation, came up, Noah knew this was his chance. He worked hard on his application and submitted an essay titled, "The Sky Has Room for Everyone," in which he expressed his belief that aviation should be inclusive and accessible to all, regardless of background. His words resonated with the program's organizers, and Noah was selected, beating out hundreds of other applicants. He was elated, knowing this was the first real step toward fulfilling his dream. The day of the program, Noah was filled with excitement. He had already toured the control tower, met the ground operations crews, and walked the jet bridge of a Boeing 787. He was fascinated by every aspect of the industry, asking thoughtful questions about thrust-to-weight ratios, weather routing, and the technicalities of flying. He wasn't just there to see the planes, he was deeply engaged, learning everything he could. Miss Harper, the HR coordinator assigned to lead his tour, noticed his enthusiasm and complimented him. "Honestly, you're asking questions I don't usually hear from second-year trainees," she said, impressed. Noah chuckled shyly and replied, "My mom always says if you want something badly enough, you better know it inside and out." Miss Harper smiled. "She sounds like a wise woman." After touring the operations wing, Noah and Miss Harper headed toward the pilot's lounge. It was a quiet room with soft chairs, perfect for waiting, and Miss Harper informed Noah that she had to step away for a short while to handle a personnel issue. "You can wait in here," she said, gesturing to the lounge. "There's a documentary about the evolution of commercial aviation playing on the TV. You can relax and watch that while I take care of this." Noah thanked her and made himself comfortable. He was eager to watch the documentary, which featured footage of early aviation pioneers and the history of flight. He didn't notice as the room slowly emptied, and pilots began to filter out to prepare for their flights. He was too absorbed in the documentary, so much so that he didn't realize how much time had passed. The room, which had once been bustling with activity, was now empty, save for Noah, who sat quietly in the corner, completely immersed in what he was watching. It was at that moment that Captain Dana Mercer, a senior pilot with over 10.00 flight hours under her belt, entered the lounge. She paused when she saw Noah sitting alone. She had been a pilot for years, and she had seen countless young trainees, but she hadn't seen Noah before. She didn't take the time to ask any questions or even to greet him. Instead, she immediately assumed that Noah didn't belong there. Without hesitation, she marched up to him, her voice cold and demanding. "Excuse me, what are you doing in here?" she asked sharply. Noah, startled by the sudden confrontation, stood up slightly. "I'm part of the Horizon Discovery Day. My guide had to step out, and she said I could wait here," he explained, holding up his visitor badge. But Captain Mercer wasn't listening. She didn't even glance at the badge. She simply told him that the lounge was for authorized personnel only. When Noah tried to explain that he had been given the badge and was a participant in the program, she grew more suspicious. "Who's your guide?" she asked. Noah answered, "Miss Harper from our," but her face showed no recognition of the name. She didn't care about the badge or the explanation. Her eyes narrowed, and she began questioning him more aggressively, accusing him of stealing the badge. "Where did you steal this from?" she demanded. Noah was stunned, his heart racing. He tried to explain, but Mercer wasn't listening. She called for security, claiming that Noah had forged his credentials and was a potential security threat. The fear in Noah's eyes was evident as he realized the gravity of the situation. He was being treated like a criminal simply for following the instructions given to him. He had done nothing wrong. His mind raced as he wondered what would happen next. Would the police be called? Would his scholarship and future be ruined? It was in that moment, as he stood there alone, misunderstood and terrified, that Noah realized the reality of what he was facing. It wasn't just about the badge or the pilot's lounge anymore. This was about how the world saw him and how others assumed his place in it based on the color of his skin. Captain Mercer didn't care about Noah's innocence. She only saw him as a threat, someone who didn't belong in a space reserved for pilots. In that moment, everything Noah had worked for, all the years of dedication to his dream of flying, seemed fragile. But little did Captain Mercer know, someone was on their way to change everything. Noah's mother, Ava Williams, the CEO of Horizon Airlines, was about to step into the situation, and everything was about to shift. Noah Williams had always known that aviation was his destiny, from the moment he was 8 years old and attended his first airshow, where he stood in awe as fighter jets roared overhead. He felt an unshakable connection to the sky, while other kids plastered their walls with posters of pop stars or athletes. Noah's room was decorated with flight maps, diagrams of cockpits, and black and white photos of aviation pioneers. His love for flying wasn't just a childhood dream, it was something that consumed him. A passion he pursued with unwavering dedication. At just 16, he had already outgrown many of his peers in terms of knowledge. He could identify commercial aircraft by the sound of their engines, a skill that set him apart from others. More importantly, he had spent years studying aviation, reading books, watching documentaries, and practicing on flight simulators. When the Horizon Discovery Day program, an exclusive event designed to introduce young students to the world of commercial aviation, opened its doors, Noah knew it was his opportunity. He worked tirelessly on his application, writing an essay titled, "The Sky Has Room for Everyone." His essay was grounded and thoughtful, a reflection of his belief in the inclusivity of aviation. The words were simple yet powerful, and they won him a spot in the program, a chance to see the inner workings of the aviation industry up close. He had beaten hundreds of applicants, and the feeling of accomplishment was overwhelming. The day of the program arrived, and Noah was both excited and nervous. His schedule included tours of the control tower, the operations wing, and the jet bridge of a Boeing 787. He was fascinated by every detail, eager to learn as much as he could. He asked insightful questions about the mechanics of flight, from thrust to weight ratios to weather routing and contingency planning for in-flight emergencies. Miss Harper, the HR coordinator assigned to guide him, noticed how engaged he was. "Honestly," she said with a smile, "you're asking questions I don't usually hear from second-year trainees." Noah chuckled shyly, acknowledging his mother's influence. "My mom always says if you want something badly enough, you better know it inside and out." Miss Harper smiled warmly. "She sounds like a wise woman." As the tour continued, Miss Harper pointed out various parts of the airport, discussing operations and protocols. But just as they were about to enter the pilot's lounge, Miss Harper received a call and had to step away to handle a personnel issue. She reassured Noah that it would only take a few minutes and suggested he wait in the lounge, where a documentary about the history of commercial aviation was playing. Noah thanked her and entered the lounge. Feeling a sense of belonging in the calm, quiet space, he settled into a seat near the window, watching the planes on the tarmac outside while the documentary began to play. It was a soothing experience, with footage of early aviation pioneers and vintage planes soaring through the skies. Noah was completely absorbed in the documentary, reflecting on how much this world fascinated him. He didn't notice as the lounge gradually emptied, with pilots heading out to prepare for flights. The room grew quieter, and Noah, still lost in his thoughts, continued watching the screen, unaware of how much time had passed. Just then, the door to the lounge opened again, and Captain Dana Mercer entered. She paused when she saw Noah sitting alone, his visitor badge dangling from his neck. Captain Mercer was a senior pilot with more than 10.00 flight hours under her belt. But she had an experience 5 years earlier that had made her more wary of unfamiliar faces in restricted areas. She did not take the time to ask Noah any questions. Instead, she immediately assumed that Noah, a young black teenager, was out of place in the pilot's lounge. Without greeting him, she walked over and demanded in a cold, authoritative tone, "What are you doing here?" Noah, startled by the sudden confrontation, quickly stood up, his heart racing. "I'm part of the Horizon Discovery Day," he explained, holding up his visitor badge. "My guide had to step out, and she said I could wait here." But Captain Mercer wasn't interested in Noah's explanation. She didn't even glance at the badge. She demanded to know who his guide was. And when he mentioned Miss Harper's name, it meant nothing to her. "Louder," she ordered, insisting he state the name again. Noah, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, repeated himself, "Miss Harper from our." But Captain Mercer wasn't satisfied. She stepped closer to him, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Where did you get that badge?" she demanded. "Where did you steal it from?" The word "steal" hit Noah like a slap in the face. His mind raced as he stammered, "No, I didn't steal it. It's mine. They gave it to me this morning. I was selected for the program." But Mercer was relentless. She didn't believe him. Instead, she reached for her radio and called for security, accusing Noah of being a potential security threat, claiming he had forged the credentials. "I need immediate assistance," she said, her voice harsh and unyielding. The fear in Noah's eyes deepened as he stood there, trembling. He had done nothing wrong. He was simply following the instructions he had been given. Yet now he was being treated like a criminal. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and Noah couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would security take him away? Would the police be called? Would this affect his scholarship or his future? The questions spun in his mind as he tried to keep his composure. But it was becoming increasingly difficult. He realized that this was no longer about a simple misunderstanding. It wasn't about the badge, the lounge, or even the documentary. This was about how others saw him, how he was judged based on the color of his skin, and how quickly assumptions were made without a second thought. Captain Mercer's actions had nothing to do with the facts. It was all about prejudice. She hadn't asked him anything. She hadn't listened. She had just assumed that because of his appearance, he didn't belong in that space. In that moment, Noah felt his dreams, the ones he had worked so hard for, begin to crumble. But what Noah didn't know was that someone was already on their way to change the course of this situation. Ava Williams, his mother and the CEO of Horizon Airlines, was about to step in and put an end to the injustice. The room was about to shift dramatically. Noah Williams had always been deeply passionate about aviation, since he was 8 years old, when his mother took him to an airshow and the roar of a fighter jet filled the sky. Noah knew his future was in the skies, while most of his peers filled their rooms with posters of pop stars and athletes. Noah's walls were decorated with flight maps, cockpit diagrams, and black and white photos of aviation pioneers. Unlike other teenagers, Noah had a unique ability to identify commercial aircraft by the sound of their engines. A talent that set him apart from others. His passion for aviation wasn't a fleeting interest, it was a calling. One he pursued with dedication and knowledge. At 16, he was already more knowledgeable about airplanes than most adults in the industry. Spending hours studying flight manuals, watching aviation documentaries, and practicing on flight simulators. When the Horizon Discovery Day program, a selective event for young aviation enthusiasts, opened up for applications, Noah seized the opportunity. He worked tirelessly on his essay titled "The Sky Has Room for Everyone," which expressed his belief that aviation should be inclusive for everyone, regardless of background or skin color. His thoughtful and grounded words helped him earn a spot in the program, beating out hundreds of other applicants. It was a huge achievement for him, a dream coming true, and he felt like this was the first step toward a future in aviation. On the day of the program, Noah was filled with excitement as he was given a tour of the control tower, the operations wing, and the jet bridge of a Boeing 787. He asked insightful questions about aviation, including details about thrust-to-weight ratios, weather routing systems, and contingency planning for in-flight emergencies. His questions impressed Miss Harper, the HR coordinator guiding him through the tour. She smiled and said, "Honestly, you're asking questions I don't usually hear from second-year trainees." Noah, a little shy, smiled and replied, "My mom always says if you want something badly enough, you better know it inside and out." Miss Harper had been impressed by his knowledge and the maturity in his approach. As they reached the pilot's lounge, Miss Harper received an urgent call and had to leave Noah there for a short while. "You can wait here," she told him, pointing to the lounge. "There's a great documentary on aviation playing. I'll be back in a bit." Noah nodded and entered the lounge. The space was calm, with soft lighting and a gentle hum from the television. He sat near the window, where he could see the planes lining up on the tarmac. As the documentary began, featuring historical footage of early propeller planes and stories of aviation pioneers, Noah was captivated. He felt like he truly belonged in that world. And for the first time, he could see his future taking shape. As he sat absorbed in the documentary, he didn't notice that the lounge was slowly emptying out. Pilots filtered out one by one, heading to their flights, and the room grew quieter. Noah remained engrossed in the film, completely unaware of the time passing. Then, the door to the lounge opened, and Captain Dana Mercer stepped in. She immediately paused, scanning the room, her sharp blue eyes landing on Noah. She was a senior pilot with over 10,000 flight hours. But she had a particular mindset shaped by her experience. 5 years prior, a security issue had caused her to be more suspicious of people she didn't recognize in restricted areas. Noah, who was sitting quietly with his visitor badge hanging from his neck, didn't pose any threat, but Captain Mercer didn't take the time to ask him any questions or give him the benefit of the doubt. Instead, she saw him as an intruder. She approached him, her voice cold and firm. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Noah stood up, startled by the sudden confrontation. "I'm part of the Horizon Discovery Day," he explained, showing her his visitor badge. "My guide had to step out, and she told me I could wait here." But Captain Mercer wasn't interested in listening to him. "Who's your guide?" she asked, clearly skeptical. When Noah answered, "Miss Harper from our," she didn't recognize the name. She demanded, louder, "This lounge is for authorized personnel only." Noah quickly held up his badge, hoping it would clarify things. "I have a visitor badge," he said, but Captain Mercer didn't even glance at it. Instead, she grew more suspicious. "Where did you get that badge? Where did you steal it from?" she asked. The word "steal" hit Noah like a slap. He was stunned and shaken by her accusation. "No, I didn't steal it," Noah stammered. "It's mine. They gave it to me this morning. I was selected for the program." But Captain Mercer wasn't convinced. She reached for her radio and called for security, accusing Noah of forging the badge and being a security threat. She didn't care about his explanation. She had already made up her mind. "Security to the pilot's lounge," she said, her voice harsh. "I have an unauthorized individual here. Possible security breach." Noah's fear grew as he realized what was happening. His heart raced, and his hands began to tremble. He couldn't understand why he was being treated like a criminal when he had done nothing wrong. He had followed all the instructions, and now he was being falsely accused. He began to panic, wondering what would happen to him. Would the police be called? Would this impact his future and his scholarship? He looked around the lounge, hoping for someone to step in and clarify things. But no one did. He felt like an outsider, an intruder in a world he had worked so hard to belong to. Captain Mercer's actions weren't just about a misunderstanding or a misplaced suspicion. It was about how quickly people could judge him based on the color of his skin without considering the facts. He wasn't a threat. He was just a kid following his dreams. But in that moment, it felt like those dreams were slipping away. What Noah didn't know was that help was on the way. Ava Williams, his mother and the CEO of Horizon Airlines, was about to step in. And everything would change. She would not only stand up for her son, but also challenge the prejudice and bias that had led to his mistreatment. As the situation continued to spiral out of control, a sudden shift occurred when the door to the lounge opened once again. This time, it wasn't just another employee or security officer walking in. It was Ava Williams, Noah's mother and the CEO of Horizon Airlines. Her presence was immediate, commanding, and undeniably authoritative. She had built her career from the ground up, having started as a flight attendant, then a licensed pilot, and later a regional operations lead before becoming the majority owner of Horizon Airlines. Ava's rise to the top had not been easy. She had fought long and hard to prove herself in an industry that often undervalued women and people of color. When she entered the lounge, her aura alone stopped everything. The room, which had been buzzing with tension and murmurs, fell into a sudden silence. Everyone knew who she was. Ava didn't need to announce her position. Her name carried weight. She quickly scanned the room, her eyes locking onto Noah, sitting alone and vulnerable, still caught in the confusion and fear of the previous moments. Without a word, she crossed the room and, in one swift motion, dropped to one knee and wrapped her arms around her son in a fierce, protective embrace. It was not a soft, comforting hug. It was a mother's unyielding protection, one that said, "You're safe now, I've got you." For a moment, Noah felt the weight of his fears lift, the tears he had been fighting back finally threatening to fall. But before he could speak, Ava stood up, her eyes now focused on Captain Mercer, who was still holding the visitor badge in her hand. Captain Mercer froze. She hadn't seen this coming. Her previous certainty and authority seemed to evaporate in the face of Ava's calm but undeniable power. Ava looked directly at her, her voice calm but cutting. "You accused my son of being a threat," she began, her words measured and sharp. "You assumed he didn't belong. You took his badge. You called him a spy." Captain Mercer tried to interject, to defend herself, but Ava's words continued without interruption. "You didn't know anything about him. You didn't ask. You just assumed because of the color of his skin that he didn't belong here. You didn't see a young man trying to follow his dreams. You saw a problem." The room fell absolutely silent, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. The officers who had been standing by, observing the situation with growing unease, now turned their attention to Ava, awaiting her instructions. She didn't raise her voice or make demands. Instead, she spoke with the calm confidence of someone who had been through battles before and emerged victorious. "I want you to hear this clearly," she said, her gaze never leaving Captain Mercer. "You didn't just hurt my son. You made a mistake that could cost him everything. You didn't see him for who he was, someone who had worked hard to get here. You didn't verify the facts before treating him like a criminal. You saw his color, and that was all you needed to make your judgment." The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't just about the confrontation anymore. It was about the deep-seated bias that had driven Mercer to treat Noah so unjustly. Ava's words carried the weight of years of experience, of having fought for every ounce of respect in a world that was not always kind. With a simple turn of her head, she signaled for one of the executives to step forward. The man quickly pulled up his tablet, confirming that Noah's badge was authentic and that he was, in fact, part of the Horizon Discovery Day program. "The badge is verified," he confirmed, showing the information to everyone in the room. Ava nodded, her voice softening, but still carrying the power of what had just transpired. "Captain Mercer, I'm placing you on immediate suspension pending an internal review," she said firmly. "Your access is revoked effective now." The room seemed to exhale collectively, the air clearing in a way that felt almost like a release. For the first time, Noah felt like he was seen, not just as a young man with a dream, but as someone who had been unjustly mistreated. Ava turned her attention to the officers, who were now beginning to process the situation with a new sense of understanding. She didn't need to shout or demand their attention, she had already proven her point. Captain Mercer, visibly smaller than she had been when she entered the room, hesitated before following the senior executive who had stepped forward to escort her out. As she left, her authority shattered. The room remained still. Ava turned back to Noah, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly. Noah, though shaken, nodded. His mother's presence had calmed him, but there was still more to be done. Ava didn't stop there. She understood that this moment was not just about her son's protection. It was about changing the culture that allowed such assumptions to be made in the first place. "We're launching a new program today," Ava said, her voice carrying a sense of finality. "It's called Future Flyers, a mentorship initiative for young people like Noah who have big dreams but too often face barriers they shouldn't have to fight alone." She went on to discuss the steps Horizon Airlines would take to ensure that bias training, stronger protections for interns and students, and a direct hotline for reporting discrimination would become a part of their company's core values. "We are not going to let this happen again," Ava stated firmly, her tone unwavering. Noah, standing quietly beside her, felt a sense of pride and gratitude swelling within him. His mother had not only defended him in that moment, but she had also taken a stand for everyone who had ever felt marginalized or overlooked. The room had shifted. It wasn't just about accountability for Captain Mercer, it was about setting a new standard. As the silence in the room began to dissipate, the crowd that had once stood silent, watching in judgment, now seemed to lean in, their eyes open to what had just happened. For the first time, Noah felt truly seen, and for the first time, the people around him understood that he wasn't just a teenager dreaming of becoming a pilot. He was a young man with a future that was now, more than ever, within reach. 1 month after the incident in the pilot's lounge, everything had changed for Noah Williams. The once tense and overwhelming memory of being wrongly accused and treated with suspicion was now a distant echo, replaced by something entirely different: recognition, respect, and a sense of belonging. The pilot's lounge, which had once been a place of fear and humiliation for Noah, was now a symbol of progress and change. It had been transformed into a space where inclusivity was not just spoken about but was visibly embodied. Framed portraits of aviation pioneers, black, brown, and white, men and women, lined the walls, each one a reminder that dreams have no singular face. There was also a new addition, a large screen that looped footage from Horizon Airline's Future Flyers mentorship program, showcasing young people from diverse backgrounds taking their first steps into the world of aviation. On the table nearby, brochures and applications for the program were neatly stacked, ready for the next generation of aspiring pilots and aviation professionals. And there, in the center of the room, stood Noah Williams, wearing a new badge that read Youth Ambassador. It was a title that represented not just his connection to Horizon Airlines, but his journey from an uncertain teenager to a symbol of change within the industry. He was no longer just a visitor, he was a voice for those who felt they didn't belong, for those who had been overlooked or underestimated. In front of him sat a group of high school students, some of whom looked at him with wide eyes, while others were nervous, unsure of their place in this space. Noah recognized that fear, the same fear he had felt when he first walked into the pilot's lounge. Unsure if he would be accepted or if his dreams would be dismissed because of who he was. But now, standing before them, he knew exactly what to say. He cleared his throat, took a deep breath, and began, "When I was your age, I thought knowing everything about planes would be enough. I thought if I worked hard, followed the rules, and loved flying more than anything, the sky would open up for me." He paused and scanned the group of students. Some of them fidgeted nervously, others avoided his gaze, but Noah continued. "One day, I sat right over there," he said, pointing to the spot where he had once sat, humiliated and misunderstood, "and I learned that sometimes people see your skin before they see your dream." The room fell silent. The words landed with a weight that wasn't just about Noah's personal experience. It was about every young person who had ever felt like they didn't belong, like their aspirations were overshadowed by prejudice. Noah let the silence settle before he spoke again, his voice steady but full of meaning. "That day almost broke me. But it didn't, because someone showed up who reminded me who I was and who I could still become." His gaze swept over the room, making eye contact with several students, allowing his words to resonate with them. "If any of you have ever felt like you didn't belong, like you had to prove yourself before anyone even listened, I want you to know you're not alone." A quiet strength radiated from him as he continued. "And the sky, it's still yours." The words hung in the air for a moment. And then, as if on cue, applause began. It started slow, hesitant, but it quickly grew stronger, filling the room with a sense of unity and solidarity. Noah wasn't trying to perform or inspire, he was simply telling his truth. And in doing so, he connected with the students in a way that was both profound and meaningful. After the session ended, several students approached Noah, eager to ask him questions, take photos, and learn more about his journey. A few lingered behind, their eyes wide with something unspoken, a quiet hope that perhaps they, too, could follow in his footsteps. When the last student left, a familiar voice called from the hallway, "You ready, Captain?" Noah turned to see Captain Amara Johnson, one of Horizon's most respected pilots, standing at the door, tall and graceful in her full uniform. She had been one of the few people to step in during the pilot's lounge incident, providing Noah with the support he so desperately needed. Now, she was here to offer him another kind of support, guidance in the world of aviation. With a warm smile, she opened the cockpit door of the Boeing 787 and gestured for Noah to step inside. "This is where you belong," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. Noah felt his heart swell with pride as he walked toward the cockpit, a place he had dreamed of since he was a child. He sat in the co-pilot's seat, feeling the hum of the aircraft beneath him and the anticipation of a future that was finally within his reach. As he looked out the window, the sky stretched wide and open before him, more inviting than ever. It no longer seemed like an unattainable dream, it was a future he was ready to claim. "Thank you," Noah said to Captain Johnson, his voice full of gratitude. She nodded, a knowing smile on her face. "Someday, this will be yours to fly." The cockpit glowed with soft amber light as the aircraft's controls surrounded him, the magic of flight coming to life in front of his eyes. Noah sat there for a moment, taking it all in, before he turned to Captain Johnson once more. "Thank you, he repeated, his voice stronger this time. Outside, the horizon awaited, the sky now filled with possibility, and for the first time, Noah knew, without a doubt, that his place in this world had been earned. The journey ahead was his to take. 1 month after the dramatic events in the pilot's lounge, everything had changed for Noah Williams. The bitter memory of being wrongly accused and humiliated was slowly fading, replaced by a new reality where he was no longer just a hopeful teenager dreaming of becoming a pilot. The room that had once been a space filled with tension and fear was now filled with symbols of progress, change, and recognition. The walls of the pilot's lounge were lined with framed portraits of aviation pioneers, men and women of all races and backgrounds, reminding everyone that dreams in aviation had no single face. These portraits, which had once been absent, were now a visual testament to inclusivity in the industry. The lounge also featured a large screen that continuously played footage of Horizon Airline's Future Flyers mentorship program, showcasing young individuals from diverse backgrounds stepping into the world of aviation. It was a visual reminder that everyone, regardless of their background, had a place in this world. In the center of the lounge stood Noah, wearing a badge that read Youth Ambassador, a new role he had earned. This wasn't just a title. It was a reflection of his journey from an outsider, misunderstood and falsely accused, to someone who now had a voice and platform to encourage other aspiring pilots. He was no longer just a visitor at Horizon Airlines, he was a symbol of resilience and change. In front of him sat a group of high school students, many of whom looked at him with wide eyes and uncertainty. Noah recognized that look. He had worn it himself. The look of someone unsure of whether their dreams would be accepted or whether they were allowed to belong in a world that often seemed to favor others. He had felt that fear when he first entered the pilot's lounge, unsure if anyone would believe in his dreams. But now, standing in front of them, he knew exactly what to say. He cleared his throat and began, "When I was your age, I thought knowing everything about planes would be enough. I thought if I worked hard, followed the rules, and loved flying more than anything, the sky would open up for me." He paused, letting the words sink in, before continuing. "One day, I sat right over there," he said, pointing to the very spot in the lounge where he had once sat, feeling isolated and misunderstood, "and I learned that sometimes people see your skin before they see your dream." The room fell silent, the weight of Noah's words settling in. He didn't have to say much. His story spoke volumes. For the students sitting before him, it was a truth they could relate to, a harsh reality they had often faced in their own lives. He allowed the silence to hang in the air for a moment, giving them time to reflect. Before he spoke again, "That day almost broke me," Noah said, his voice steady but full of meaning. "But it didn't, because someone showed up who reminded me who I was and who I could still become." His gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with several students. "If any of you have ever felt like you didn't belong, like you had to prove yourself before anyone even listened, I want you to know you're not alone." He paused, letting the words settle in the room. "And the sky, it's still yours." At that moment, a quiet but powerful applause erupted. It started slow, almost hesitant, but quickly grew into a stronger, more confident show of support. Noah wasn't trying to inspire them in the traditional sense. He wasn't delivering a motivational speech. He was simply sharing his story, his truth, and in doing so, he had connected with the students in a way that was both real and profound. The applause was not just for his journey, but for the connection he had made with each of them. After the session ended, several students approached Noah, eager to ask him questions, take photos, and learn more about how he had overcome the obstacles he faced. Some of them stayed behind, their eyes wide with something unspoken, hope. Hope that perhaps they, too, could one day follow in his footsteps and achieve their dreams despite the challenges they would inevitably face. When the last student had left the room, a familiar voice called out from the hallway, "You ready, Captain?" Noah turned to see Captain Amara Johnson, a senior pilot at Horizon Airlines, standing at the door in full uniform. Captain Johnson had been one of the few people who had stepped up during the pilot's lounge incident, offering Noah the support he desperately needed. Now, she was here to offer him something else, guidance in the world of aviation. With a warm smile, she opened the cockpit door of the Boeing 787 and motioned for Noah to step inside. "This is where you belong," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. Noah felt a rush of pride and excitement as he walked toward the cockpit. A place he had dreamed of standing in since he was a child. Sitting in the co-pilot's seat, he felt the hum of the aircraft beneath him, the controls surrounding him like the tools of a world he had only ever imagined. Outside the window, the sky stretched wide, full of promise. It was no longer an unattainable dream. It was a future within his reach. Noah turned to Captain Johnson, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, her smile knowing, "Someday, this will be yours to fly." Noah looked around the cockpit, taking in the controls and the view of the horizon, feeling as if everything had finally come full circle. The dream he had held onto for so long was now a reality he was beginning to step into. He smiled, looking out at the sky beyond, and realized that the world was open to him in ways he had never imagined. The sky was no longer just a place to dream about, it was a place he belonged. "Thank you," he said again, his voice stronger this time. The hum of the aircraft seemed to echo his thoughts. Outside, the horizon awaited. The future was no longer a distant dream. It was a reality, and Noah Williams was ready to soar. A month after the incident that had almost shattered Noah Williams' dream of becoming a pilot, things had dramatically shifted. What had once been a room of humiliation and misunderstanding, the pilot's lounge at Horizon Airlines, was now a symbol of hope, progress, and change. The lounge, which had been the site of his unjust treatment, had transformed into a place where inclusivity and diversity were now celebrated. The walls, which had once stood blank and silent, now featured framed portraits of aviation pioneers, men and women of all backgrounds, reminding everyone that the dream of flying belonged to all. The new addition to the lounge, a large screen displaying footage from the Future Flyers mentorship program, showcased young, aspiring aviators from diverse backgrounds, proving that the industry was opening up to people who had long been overlooked. The space now had an aura of inspiration, showing that the sky wasn't just for a select few but for everyone. In the center of the room stood Noah, his new badge reading, Youth Ambassador. It was a powerful title, representing not only his journey but his newfound role as a leader for others who had faced the same obstacles. The young man who had once been a misunderstood visitor in the lounge was now someone who had the authority to speak, mentor, and represent the dreams of so many. He stood before a group of high school students, each of whom was filled with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and fear. Noah had been there too, unsure of his place, doubting whether he belonged. He had once felt that no one could see his dream, only the color of his skin. And now he was in front of them, ready to share his story. He cleared his throat and began. "When I was your age, I thought knowing everything about planes would be enough. I thought that if I worked hard, followed the rules, and loved flying more than anyone, the sky would open up for me." His voice was steady, and he allowed the words to sink in before continuing. "One day, I sat right over there," he said, gesturing to the spot in the lounge where he had once felt the weight of judgment and fear. "And I learned that sometimes people see your skin before they see your dream." The room went silent, the weight of Noah's words hanging in the air. He wasn't trying to deliver a motivational speech. He was simply telling the truth that so many of the students in front of him had likely experienced in their own lives. Noah let the silence linger for a moment, giving him the space to reflect on what he had just said. He then continued, "That day almost broke me." His voice soft but filled with conviction. "But it didn't, because someone showed up who reminded me who I was and who I could still become." His gaze swept across the group of students, each of them reflecting his own fears and dreams from a time before. "If any of you have ever felt like you didn't belong, like you had to prove yourself before anyone even listened, I want you to know you're not alone." Noah's words were simple, but they were profound, resonating deeply with the young faces in front of him. "And the sky, it's still yours," he added, his voice filled with quiet strength. The room remained still for a moment, processing what Noah had just shared. Then, almost as if on cue, applause broke out. It started softly, hesitant, as if unsure of how to respond. But soon it grew stronger, more confident, a collective recognition of Noah's journey. The applause wasn't for his ability to inspire. They didn't need to be motivated by his story. It was for the truth he had spoken. For the courage it took to stand up in front of them and share something so personal. It was the acknowledgement of a young man who had transformed a painful experience into a beacon of hope for others. After the session, many students approached Noah, eager to talk to him, ask questions, take pictures, and learn more about how he had made it through. Some lingered, eyes wide, holding on to something unsaid, a flicker of hope sparked by his words. These were students who, like him, had perhaps doubted whether they belonged, had been afraid to dream too big. They saw in him someone who had persevered and now had a place in a world that didn't always seem to welcome them. When the last student left, a familiar voice called out from the hallway, "You ready, Captain?" Noah turned to see Captain Amara Johnson, one of the most respected pilots at Horizon Airlines. Standing at the door, she had been there for him when no one else had, offering him support in the pilot's lounge that day when everything seemed to be falling apart. Now, she was offering him something even greater, guidance in the world of aviation. Captain Johnson opened the cockpit door of the Boeing 787, smiling at Noah as she gestured for him to step inside. "This is where you belong," she said, her tone calm but filled with warmth. Noah's heart swelled as he walked toward the cockpit. This was the place he had dreamed of being for as long as he could remember, the seat he had always imagined himself in. As he sat in the co-pilot's seat, his fingers brushed the controls, feeling the hum of the aircraft beneath him. The cockpit, which had once seemed like an unattainable dream, was now a reality. Outside, the sky stretched wide and open, more inviting than ever. Noah looked out at the horizon, knowing that he was finally in the right place. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Captain Johnson nodded, a proud smile on her face. "Someday, this will be yours to fly." Noah took a deep breath, looking out at the endless expanse of blue before him. The dream he had worked so hard for, the dream that had once seemed too far out of reach, was now within his grasp. For the first time, the sky didn't seem so daunting. It was no longer a distant goal, it was his future, waiting for him to claim it. "Thank you," Noah repeated, his voice stronger now, filled with confidence. As he sat in the cockpit, he realized that everything had changed. The journey that had started in the pilot's lounge with fear and uncertainty had led him here, to this moment of belonging and promise. The sky was no longer a dream, it was a place he had earned the right to be. The horizon stretched wide before him, full of possibilities, and Noah Williams was ready to soar.